I don't know why she's still here. She's a dispensable asset who runs on caffeine and spreadsheets. That's what I heard through the goddamn glass wall. Lance Kettering, VP of Product, owner of the most punchable smile in 3 states. He was laughing when he said it, leaning over someone's cubicle with his shirt sleeves rolled like he'd just gotten back from saving a burning orphanage. I was 4 feet away, invisible as always, half-eaten salad in one hand and Jira ticket in the other. Listening to my own obituary being workshopped like it was a networking joke. Dispensable asset. After 6 years of cleaning up every fire, this department started. After debugging the server crash on my anniversary dinner from a Red Lobster parking lot because Lance forgot to assign coverage. After patching together the integration module with nothing but duct tape code and prayer because the budget got slashed so he could upgrade the espresso machine in the break room, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I swallowed it like a pill that wouldn't dissolve. Just stood there letting the words dissolve slow and bitter. I was used to being overlooked, but something about that sentence cut deeper. Like I was the office paperclip. Bent, used, and tossed back in the drawer. You know what's wild? 90% of people who hear stories like this never hit the subscribe button. Yeah, I see you. You're sipping your gas station coffee, whispering oh hell no like it's a prayer and forgetting to tap that like. If you want more tales of corporate karma served cold, hit that subscribe. It keeps the stories rolling and trust me, what comes next? You'll want a front row seat. Now, back to Lance. I stood there a second longer than I should have, which was exactly long enough for him to look over and realize I'd heard him. He gave me this wide-eyed smile like a teenager caught shoplifting condoms and tried to pivot. Oh, hey Patricia, just talking shop? Right, like shop was some euphemism for assassinating the backbone of his entire tech stack. Cool, I said, dry as old toast. Love being part of shop. He chuckled. I walked off, didn't look back. But the sentence kept echoing in my ears for the rest of the day. Dispensable, like the word itself had fingers wrapping around my ribs. By the time I got home, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. I mean, I wasn't exactly employee of the month material. I didn't schmooze. I didn't do happy hour. I didn't wear neon heels or laugh at Lance's golf metaphors. But I shipped. I built. I made sure this company didn't fall flat on its smug face every time the wind blew a little sideways. So I sat on the couch, cracked a la croix, and pulled up our production logs just to remind myself of how many times I'd caught Lance's visionary strategies before they crashed the system. The numbers didn't lie. That night, I didn't sleep. Because here's the thing, it wasn't just the insult. It was the realization that I'd spent 6 years being essential, quietly. I was the duct tape, the keystone, the gal who knew where the bones were buried because she buried half of them, and I had the receipts. The next morning, I walked into work with a smile that scared people. Not fake, not forced, just patient. The smile of a woman who'd been underestimated one too many times and started taking notes. Because if Lance thought I was dispensable, maybe it was time to see what happened when I let go. That's when they brought in Ethan. Quiet kid. Nervous hands. Looked like he got lost on the way to a comp sci midterm and ended up in corporate America by accident. Everyone assumed he wouldn't last a month. Especially Lance, who called him Junior like we were all living in a bad sitcom. But I saw something in him, something familiar, and I had plans. The first time I met Ethan, he apologized for existing. Twice. Once when I bumped into him near the microwave and he dropped his Tupperware of sad rice and string beans, and again when he handed me a merge request like it was a court summons. Sorry, I'm still figuring out the branching structure, he stammered, eyes flicking everywhere but my face. I glanced at the code. It was messy. Not broken, just unsure of itself like the person who wrote it. He hadn't messed anything up permanently, which in our department counted as a small miracle. You didn't light the building on fire, I said, handing the printout back. That's a win. He laughed, more a wheeze than a chuckle. Kid looked like he hadn't eaten a full meal since the onboarding pizza. Pale, always blinking like he expected to be hit with a Nerf dart or a layoff notice. Welcome to Nexora, Ethan, I added. We survive mostly on caffeine, sarcasm, and the misguided belief that someone in management knows what they're doing. He smiled for real that time. It was small, lopsided, but real. Lance, of course, didn't notice him. Barely even acknowledged his existence except to bark vague directions like ask Patricia how we do deploys or run this through Jenkins or whatever. Classic leadership by deflection. The only time Lance looked at Ethan directly was during an all-hands when he forgot Ethan's name and called him Ali. So naturally, Ethan started hovering around my desk like a stray cat who couldn't decide whether I was safe or a boot in disguise. I didn't mind. In fact, I saw something in him that reminded me of, well, me 6 years ago. Wide-eyed, overwhelmed, wondering which mistakes would get me noticed and which would get me fired. I started helping him out quietly. No big displays, just nudges, suggestions. I rewrote a few commits, then walked him through why. Explained what code review really meant around here. Translation: don't make Lance look stupid, even accidentally. Showed him where the real knowledge was stored, hint, not in Confluence, but in a private Slack group called Dead Man Switch where the senior devs kept actual documentation like it was Cold War intel. He was sharp once you cut past the nerves. Started picking things up fast. I'd correct a function once and never have to repeat it. Even caught a bug in one of Lance's pet modules, though I gently convinced him not to flag it in Jira. Office Politics 101. Never outshine a narcissist unless you've got an exit strategy or a parachute. Over time, he stopped apologizing so much, got steadier, bolder, still quiet but with an edge. One afternoon, after cleaning up an authentication mess left by a dev who'd rage quit mid-sprint, Ethan looked over and said, "Why do we keep fixing all this without credit?" I tilted my head, because if we stopped, the whole thing would collapse. And if we complain, they'll just hire someone cheaper to replace us. He blinked. That's bleak. That's corporate, I replied. But that sentence haunted me more than it should have, because he was right. We were the scaffolding holding up a building that kept calling itself a castle, and we were expected to disappear once the ribbon was cut. I didn't plan on getting attached to the kid, but something about the way he listened, really listened, wore me down. He asked questions that made me think. He was raw, but he had a backbone. And he saw the cracks in the system the way I did, saw them early instead of 6 years in like me. So I started showing him the ropes. Not just the where's the staging server ropes, but the deeper ones, the buried systems, the legal ductwork, the compliance relics no one looked at anymore. One evening, long after most people had gone home, we were elbows deep in a deprecated API nightmare when I pulled open a drive labeled Old Infra and said, "Ever seen the Clause library?" He shook his head. I opened a folder. Nested, obscure, but there it was. Clause 14.3c, the original custodian document for the modular authentication layer. My name on the digital ink, dated, sealed. Never revoked, he read it once. Then again, his brow furrowed. "This still stands?" he asked. I smiled. "Unless someone officially updates it, yeah, and nobody ever does. They assume the system just works." He sat back in his chair, processing. I could see the wheels turning. "Why show me this?" I paused before answering. "Because knowing where the leverage is matters." He nodded, slow, said nothing more. But I saw it, the spark, the quiet kind. The kind that waits, learns, and eventually acts. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel quite so alone. They scheduled it for 9:07 a.m. Not 9 o'clock, not 9:15. No room for small talk, no chance to pretend it was anything but what it was. I knew the moment the calendar invite landed, color-coded and sterile, subject line, strategic resource review required attendance. HR in the sender field. No agenda. Just one quiet dagger between two budget meetings. I wore black, not out of drama, out of precision. A silent signal to myself that something was dying today. Maybe not me, but something I'd built, something I'd carried on my back for too damn long. I walked into that glass-walled aquarium like it was a baptism in bleach. Inside, Danielle from HR, linking too much and wearing the nervous smile of someone who once gave me a secret Santa candle and now had to hand me a corporate death sentence. And of course, Lance, elbows wide on the conference table, tapping a Montblanc pen like he was signing autographs instead of contracts. He didn't even stand when I walked in. "Patricia," he said, like it pained him to remember my name. "Thanks for joining." Danielle inhaled like she was about to perform mouth-to-mouth. "We've been conducting a company-wide optimization strategy review, and unfortunately, it's the budget," Lance interrupted, grinning like a game show host announcing a bad prize. "You know how these things go." I nodded slowly, letting them talk. I wasn't going to make it easier with questions. I'd seen this script before, just never with my name on it. "Your role, while valued, overlaps with some newer strategic directions," Danielle added. "This isn't a reflection of your performance." "Of course not. It never is. They don't fire you because you're bad. They fire you because someone wants your chair for their nephew." I looked at Lance. He was enjoying this. Not in a cruel, mustache-twirling way, no, that would at least require passion. He was enjoying it the way you enjoy a vending machine finally giving you 2 bags of chips. Unexpected bonus. No emotional investment. "We appreciate everything you've done," he said, like I was a babysitter they'd outgrown. And then came the kicker. "We're happy to give you 2 weeks paid transition time," Danielle said, sliding a branded folder across the table like a Severin-stuffed Happy Meal. I stared at the folder, then at her, then at Lance. He gave me the smirk, the one that said this was always going to happen, just not fast enough. I folded my hands, calm as still water, and said the only thing that didn't taste like blood. Understood. That word sat in the air like fog. Danielle blinked again, surprised I hadn't begged or exploded or cried. Lance tapped his pen twice, like a drum roll for nothing. I stood, took the folder, and walked out. Not fast, not slow, just precise. Past the intern who was already eyeing my desk. Past the breakroom fridge where someone had stolen my yogurt again. Past the open-plan jungle of keyboards and clacking and Slack pings and people pretending not to see. Back at my cubicle I sat, just sat. My monitor was still on. Jenkins was mid-build. Ethan had left me a sticky note, "Deployed your fix?" with a little doodle of a robot giving a thumbs up. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't pack anything. I didn't cry. I emailed Ethan a single line, "Keep your head down, but keep your eyes open." Then I logged out, but not before one last stop. I opened the folder labeled NDA Locked Archive, dug past the old project specs, past the buried flowcharts, past the decaying bureaucratic fossils nobody ever thought to delete, and I uploaded one file. Just one. Clause 14.3, see Custodian Auth Module PDF. Then I closed the tab, cleared my cache, and walked out without looking back. Lance might have thought he won something that morning. He hadn't seen the board yet. He hadn't read the contract. He hadn't asked who still held the keys to the thing that made his $150M pipeline look shiny and investor-ready. He would. Oh, he would. 3 days after the meeting, the fog lifted. Not all at once, more like mist peeling off a lake at sunrise, slow, quiet, reluctant. But underneath the numbness, something new started to take shape. It wasn't rage. I'd burned through that. It wasn't grief. I hadn't lost anything worth mourning. It was clarity. Cold. Sharp clarity, like finding a map you forgot you'd drawn, with a red X marked long before you knew where you were going. I didn't go to work. Didn't need to. I still had remote access for the duration of my transition period, a phrase that sounded like it belonged in hospice care, not HR policy. Nexora's IT hadn't revoked my permissions yet, because nobody in legal had waved a red flag. And nobody in legal waved red flags unless you made them. So I logged into my personal cloud archive. Not the official Nexora drive, the one they'd probably sanitized already, but the encrypted corner I kept off-grid. My own little graveyard of legacy code, stubbed modules, dependency trees, and every mistake we ever fixed under cover of darkness. And there it was, buried under 3 folders of backlogged build notes and a zip file called Do Not Delete V2, like I'd been leaving myself breadcrumbs all along. Clause 14.3, C, Custodian Auth Module PDF. I clicked it open. It was ugly, legalese layered in corporate mildew. But the sentence was still there, plain as ever. Primary custodianship of the modular authentication framework, including all derivative logic and branching subarchitectures, remains assigned to the original architect of record, P. Wexler, until superseded by formal redesignation approved by compliance and legal. Dated, initialed, backed up. Archived, and this was the kicker, never updated. 6 years ago, we drafted it in a fit of startup paranoia back when everyone was scared of IP theft and contractor lawsuits. The clause was a failsafe. Back then, I didn't think much of it. It was just one more paper in a stack of paperwork no one ever read. But now it was a lit match in a room full of gas. They never redesignated it, never rescinded it, never even asked. Why would they? I wasn't someone they planned around. I was the scaffolding they forgot to dismantle. My name still lived on the only module that mattered, the one powering Nexora's new licensing deal, the one they'd spent the last year polishing for market. Lance had built his little press tour around it, called it a revolutionary leap in security infrastructure, said it future-proofed our entire platform. Funny, because legally, he didn't own it. I sat back in my chair, exhaled, and for the first time since that meeting, I smiled, not a bitter one, not angry or smug, just satisfied, like a craftsman checking the final seam on something carefully, silently stitched. I didn't send it to legal. I didn't email Lance. I didn't make a noise. Instead, I picked up my phone and called Ethan. He answered on the second ring, breathless. Patricia, you busy? Just hiding from Lance. He wants me to draft a status doc on the licensing rollout, but he keeps changing the specs mid-sentence. I chuckled. Some things never change. I was going to ask, how you're doing? I'm fine, I said, better than expected. He hesitated. I still don't understand what happened. They didn't even give a reason. One day you're the glue holding this place together, the next gone. I opened the clause, took a screenshot, texted it to him mid-call. He went quiet. What's this? Clause 14.3c, I said. It's in the original framework charter. Custodianship of the modular auth framework. I could hear him clicking. This is real as your anxiety dreams about Jenkins. Holy Patricia, this changes everything. If legal sees this, they haven't, and I haven't shown it to them. He was silent. Then, in a low voice, why show it to me? I didn't answer right away because I needed him to sit with it, to understand. Finally, I said, because you're the only one still listening, and because knowing what something's worth is only half the game. Knowing when to use it, that's the other half. He was quiet again, but this time it felt like gears turning, not uncertainty. I didn't need to tell him what to do. I didn't need to spell it out. I'd planted the seed, that was enough. Lance had underestimated me. He was about to underestimate Ethan too. They rented a damn spotlight, not metaphorically. A literal spotlight. Mounted in the corner of the atrium, sweeping across rows of standing desks and demo booths like this, was the Oscars for white-collar mediocrity. I watched it all unfold via the internal live stream from my living room, coffee in hand, slippers on, trying not to grind my teeth into chalk. Nexora had closed the $150 million licensing deal with Sondra, multinational that couldn't code its way out of a wet paper bag, but had deep pockets and a fetish for buzzwords. And Lance, dear, dazzling, hollow-skulled Lance, had turned the announcement into a company-wide event. Press on site, photographer with a ring light, branded cupcakes with Nexora's logo printed in edible ink, They even rolled out a branded innovation backdrop for selfies, which looked like someone fed clip art into a blender. Lance took the stage with the subtlety of a game show host on Adderall. Today, he beamed, marks a new era in Nexora's legacy. A vision that began 18 months ago has now become a product that will reshape authentication in the enterprise space. This was no small feat. It took bold thinking, strategic leadership, and of course he placed a hand to his chest like he was about to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, the kind of technical foresight that only comes from true ownership. He paused for applause. He got it. From people who didn't know better, who weren't there when he signed off on skipping QA for a faster go-to-market, who weren't on the weekend call when we had to roll back an entire build because his vision introduced a memory leak that nearly wiped client-side login histories, who didn't know the framework's core had been architected in a cramped server closet by a woman eating stale almonds and praying Jenkins didn't crash mid-deploy. Me. Not a word about me. Not a nod. Not a thank you. He name-dropped 4 product managers who hadn't written a line of code, gave shout-outs to marketing for positioning the message with elegance, even thanked his family for believing in the vision, as if his kids had debugged the recursive loop that nearly killed the API call stack last spring. And at the very back of the room, flanked by 2 potted plants and a catering table, stood Ethan. I saw him on the live stream, arms crossed, back straight, face blank, but the kind of blank you get just before the dam breaks. Not anger, not shock, something deeper. Disappointment scorched into silence. He was wearing the tie I gave him. Navy, clean, conservative. That it made him feel like someone. Now it just looked like armor. I could tell he hadn't clapped. The camera panned back to Lance, who was now showing off a slide deck filled with stats and phrases like scalable integrity and modular trust orchestration, which meant exactly nothing. Then came the final slide, $150M signed. Global licensing rights secured. Vision by Lance Kettering. And below it, his face. Photoshopped heroically. Chin raised. Eyes full of pretend purpose, as if he'd personally hand-stitched every line of back-end logic like some kind of artisanal coder. I wanted to throw my coffee mug through the screen. Instead, I muted the live stream and opened Slack. I hovered over Ethan's name. Typed, still think it's too early? Waited, watched, no reply, but I saw the typing dots flash, stop, then start again. Then nothing. He was thinking, weighing, that was enough because the walls were closing in. Lance didn't know it, but the floor under his Italian loafers had started to crack the moment he opened that PowerPoint and claimed full ownership of a system whose legal foundation still had my name burned into the stone. It wasn't my voice on the stage, but it didn't have to be. Ethan was in the room, and he knew what I'd built, where the bodies were buried, where the documentation lived. What clause lived at the bottom of the repo like a sleeping dragon with my initials stitched into its scales. Lance had made his move. The next one wouldn't be loud, it would be lethal. The room was too quiet for a celebration. This wasn't the atrium circus with cupcakes and photo ops. This was conference room C, the one with the frosted windows, the low ceiling, and the silence that felt like it had a weight class. No live stream, no applause. Just 6 people seated around a long oval table pretending this wasn't about to blow up something very expensive. At the head of the table, Lance, still in his showman suit, only now it looked tight across the shoulders. His tie was crooked. His eyes flicked toward the legal rep like he expected a pop quiz and forgot to study. Legal was there in force. Natalie from compliance. Aaron from contracts. One of the interns from the legal review rotation who looked like she wanted to crawl under the table and die. And Ethan. Quiet, clean-cut Ethan. Tie knotted with surgical precision, folder in hand. I wasn't in the room, but I'd given him everything he needed. Natalie cleared her throat. Before we finalize the transfer agreement, we need documentation verifying IP custodianship for the core authentication module. Lance blinked. That's been handled. It's not in the clause log, it's part of the legacy asset register. Checked it myself. Aaron raised an eyebrow. Can you show us? Lance hesitated like the air had thickened and he couldn't quite get his voice through it. The architecture team owns it. I delegated. To who? Natalie asked. Silence. And that's when Ethan placed the folder on the table. Neat, measured, deliberate. I think this is what you're looking for, he said, calm as a surgeon holding out a scalpel. Natalie opened it. Inside 3 pages. 1 signature. Dated. Indexed. Stamped. Clause 14.3c. Aaron leaned forward. Read it again. This says custodianship of the modular authentication system remains assigned to Patricia Wexler. Lance shifted in his seat. That clause is outdated. It was from the early development cycle. A formality. Was it rescinded? Natalie asked. It didn't need to be. Was it redesignated? Aaron pressed. I delegated internally. Informally, Natalie's voice was flat. Informal delegation does not override documented custodianship. The air in the room snapped taut. Ethan sat very still. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smirking. Just letting the document speak like he'd simply turned on the lights in a room full of rats. Lance reached for the folder. Natalie blocked it with her hand. We'll need to pause the licensing execution until this is resolved, she said. Pause? Lance barked. We've already signed. Contingent on final custodianship verification. Aaron replied, flipping to the contract addendum. Paragraph 6, it's very clear, but she doesn't even work here anymore. Doesn't matter, Natalie said, cool as an avalanche. Custodianship doesn't automatically dissolve upon termination. It has to be reassigned in writing, with consent from the original architect. And in this case, Ethan added, finally looking Lance dead in the eyes, that was Patricia. Lance looked like someone had just poured ice water down his spine. No bluff, no pivot. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I wasn't aware you gave a keynote, Ethan said, voice steady, called it your vision. But the foundation you stood on still belonged to someone else. No one said anything after that, not for a long moment. The silence was glacial, final. Even the intern had stopped breathing. Finally, Natalie stood. We're going to need to reevaluate the IP chain before we proceed. Aaron nodded. And someone needs to contact Patricia Wexler. Ethan didn't smile. He just sat there, watching Lance shrink inch by inch, like a balloon with a slow leak. The man who had posed under a spotlight 48 hours earlier now looked like he couldn't find the door, let alone explain how he'd built the system he supposedly owned. The table, the air, the floor, all belonged to someone else now, and her name was still on the document. By 9:04 the next morning, the internal Slack channels were curiously quiet. No gifts, no happy Thursday, chatter from the HR social committee, just one terse memo from legal stamped confidential and addressed to the executive tier. Licensing delay pending custodianship clarification. 5 words that sounded like legalese, but in this company. That was code for someone lit a dumpster fire, and now we all get to roast marshmallows around it. They dragged Lance into the executive review board meeting 30 minutes later. This time, it wasn't just legal. The CEO was there, Ku, head of compliance. Aaron again, now with a thick binder labeled IP ownership chain review, which he slammed on the table like it owed him money. Lance walked in trying to look casual, but the swagger didn't stick. His collar was wrinkled, his eyes were red. For the first time since his fake cry speech about leadership resilience during last year's layoffs, he looked genuinely rattled. Let's talk about Clause 14.3c, the CEO said without preamble. Lance exhaled hard, as if he'd rehearsed for this. It's an outdated clause, a clerical holdover from a prior version of the system architecture. The core module has evolved significantly since then. Natalie from compliance didn't flinch. Has it evolved into something not built by Patricia Wexler? Silence. Lance's jaw twitched. The current system is built on top of her framework, yes, but so it still relies on the original architecture she authored? I mean, in a legacy sense, maybe, but it's modular. The dependencies are, Aaron cut in. No, we verified the dependency map last night. Your system branches off her original module like a scaffold. The authentication layer is still foundational. The CEO leaned forward. So why wasn't this clause updated? Lance opened his mouth, closed it. We assumed custodianship rolled over when she left. You assumed? The COO echoed. Lance floundered. There was never any formal indication that her custodianship was still active. It just wasn't on anyone's radar. Aaron flipped to a page in the binder. Because you failed to flag it during the last compliance review. Submitted a signed IP custodianship transfer form with the name left blank. The CEO blinked. You submitted a blank signature field? Lance shifted in his seat. We were rushing the filing. The quarter was closing, so you cut corners. Strategic acceleration, Lance mumbled. Ethan was seated near the side wall, again, quiet, hands folded, but when the room turned toward him, he didn't flinch. Ethan, the CEO asked. You worked with Patricia directly, correct? Yes, did she indicate any knowledge of her continued custodianship? Ethan nodded once. Yes, she showed me the clause and the documentation supporting it. Did she attempt to weaponize it? No, Ethan said flatly. She never raised it. She just kept the module isolated, compliant, documented, and secure, like she always did. Aaron added, her version history shows perfect consistency with compliance protocol. 0 unauthorized alterations. The module was never rolled into broader dev branches without her sign-off. So, Natalie said slowly, she held the key the whole time. The room went still again. Lance, desperate now, tried another angle. Okay, but let's not pretend this is some kind of sabotage. She had ample opportunity to communicate this concern. If she wanted clarity, she could have brought it up. Aaron slammed the folder shut. She did. To the person you assigned to replace her. The CEO looked at Lance like he was a mold growing in the corner of a shower. You told the board this IP was clean, that there were no custodial conflicts. There weren't, Lance started. There were, the CEO snapped. You just didn't know or didn't look. Either way, your job was to know. Lance deflated like a balloon left out in the sun. Every justification he'd polished for years, his metrics, his market speak, his glossy investor deck, none of it mattered here. Not with the clause on paper. Not with Patricia's name in ink. Not with Ethan backing her up with steady calm that made Lance look like a clown trying to juggle legal grenades. In a glass-paneled room down the hall, I sat watching the security feed on mute. Ethan had given me access, his transition gift, he'd called it, a quiet window into the reckoning. I didn't smile, not really. But there was something in my chest, a stillness, a knowing. Lance had always treated me like scaffolding. Something temporary, necessary but disposable. Funny thing about scaffolding, pull the wrong pole and the whole damn building shifts. They called me in on a Friday. No agenda, no heads up, just a brief message from Aaron, polite but heavy. The board would like you present for the custodianship resolution review. 11 a.m. Conference room A, not C, not the legal pit. A, where the executive board met behind soundproof walls and million-dollar secrets. I hadn't stepped foot in that room since year 2, back when Nexora was still a startup and people still remembered who built things. I wore gray, no jewelry, no makeup. Just the version of me that had always been there, clean, measured, forgettable until someone needed saving. When I walked in, the room was half full. The board was already seated. 6 figures with iron suits and agenda binders, flipping silently through paperwork that had my name on every 4th page. Aaron gave me a respectful nod. Ethan was in the corner again, calm and composed, a silent anchor. Lance sat at the head of the table, or what used to feel like the head. Today, it looked more like a throne built from napkins. His tie was gone. Jacket wrinkled, sleeves rolled up like he'd been fighting for his career all morning and lost every round on technicalities. They motioned for me to take the seat at the far end. Not at the table, against the wall. I didn't flinch, just sat, legs crossed, hands in lap. Natalie began. The board is currently reviewing the legal viability of executing the licensing deal without a full custodianship transfer from Miss Wexler. Clause 14.3, C, remains binding. You're in breach if we proceed without her signature. The CEO added, Sondra has been notified of the pause. They are unhappy. Translation, there were lawyers circling in the water now. Lance hadn't spoken, not yet. He kept glancing at me, like I was a ghost sitting in the corner of his mansion, reminding him he didn't own the foundation. Finally, he spoke, quiet, controlled, but tight around the edges. Did you plan this? 6 syllables, acidic and desperate. Room shifted like everyone exhaled through their teeth at once. I didn't blink. No, I said, you planned this. I just documented it. Silence, pure, dense silence. The kind that clings to your skin, that sticks in your throat. Lance opened his mouth, then shut it again. Ethan cleared his throat and addressed the board. The module in question was kept isolated by Patricia per protocol. We validated the access logs. There were no shared forks, no unauthorized changes. Our documentation is complete, signed, and unbroken. Natalie confirmed. It meets every internal audit requirement. The COO looked at Lance. So you built an entire campaign around a module you didn't technically own. Lance mumbled something that sounded like it was the same system. It was hers, the CEO snapped. And you stood on a stage 2 days ago and told the world it was yours. I sat there, unmoved. No gloating, no victory lap, just the truth, laid bare under fluorescent light. Lance looked at me again, eyes bloodshot, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. I didn't look away, because here's the thing about power. Real power doesn't shout, it doesn't strut. It doesn't hold press conferences, it waits, it documents. It builds quietly in a corner until someone thinks they can paint over it, and then the walls shift, and suddenly they realize the foundation was never theirs. Patricia, the CEO, said, I'll be in touch formally regarding custodianship transfer options. You're under no obligation to sign anything today. I know, I said, nothing more. I stood when they dismissed us. Lance remained seated, didn't say another word, didn't follow me out. He couldn't, not when the board was still staring at the throne he'd built on sand. The memo hit the company inbox at 6:12 a.m. on Monday. Subject, temporary leadership transition, product division, no pleasantries, no euphemisms. Just a blunt announcement that Lance Kettering was being removed from all licensing deal oversight, effective immediately, pending internal investigation into documentation irregularities. They didn't even give him the courtesy of a farewell email. By 10 a.m., every glass wall on the 3rd floor buzzed with whispers. Screenshots of his keynote Slide with Vision by Lance Kettering were now meme fodder. One engineer photoshopped it to read, Built on a Lie by Lance Kettering. The post got 87 emoji reactions in the first hour, most of them popcorn. The intern who used to fetch his $6 lattes now sat at the desk beside Ethan, quietly updating the authentication branch permissions that had, until last week, been tied to a name no longer welcome in the room. They reassigned the licensing project to a crisis response team. Aaron was looped in full time. Legal pushed back the Sondra contract by 30 days, citing custodianship integrity review. Translation, clean up the mess and fast. As for me, they tried. The head of HR reached out by noon. We'd love to discuss a new opportunity with you, Patricia, Director of Systems Integrity. A dedicated role overseeing infrastructure continuity and IP custodianship. The salary was a leap. The title came with a parking space, a corner office, direct line to the executive suite, but I'd already said yes elsewhere. The offer came through 3 days prior from Viridian Tech, one of Nexora's competitors. Smaller, quieter, no press stunts. They reached out after hearing what happened. Word travels fast when your documentation derails a $150M deal. They didn't ask for a second interview. They didn't lowball. They offered equity, ownership. A blank slate with a single condition, build it right. I accepted. On my last day inside Nexora's walls, I returned my badge, boxed up a few personal items, one plant, a coffee mug, a notebook full of diagrams they never bothered to read, and stopped by the conference room where it all unraveled. It was empty now. Still. But in my mind, I saw it all again. The suits, the silence, the folder with my name in print, the way Lance's voice had cracked when he realized the floor beneath him wasn't real. Memory played like a film strip clicking to a halt. I turned, walked out. No applause, no drama, just gravity. Lance never spoke to me again. I imagine he's still trying to find someone else to blame, still rewriting the story in his head, trying to pretend he tripped over red tape instead of the truth. But the board knew. Legal knew. Ethan knew, and me? I didn't need a parade. I didn't need vindication printed in bold font. I had something better, a new desk, a real title, my name inked beside a contract that meant something, and the knowledge that while some people build empires on hot air, I'd built mine in silence. Stone by stone, line by line, clause by clause, I was dispensable until they realized what I held. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.